And I don't know if James needs to be introduced, but he's truly one of my favorite human beings. He brings the Art Institute alive, and thanks to him, I have had the most incredible educational, emotional, artistic experiences and the intimacy of certain works and artists, and I am very grateful to him. Most of you know who he is, so James.
Well, thank you for the really warm introduction, Barbara. It has been my pleasure getting to know you over the years and sharing the museum. And that is one of the great joys in my life, being here at the Art Institute. And when you asked me a few weeks ago if I would consider joining the Salon to talk about a topic from the museum, I was really honored. And then I began to think about what might be, I hate to say pandemic appropriate, but I was thinking about, we've all been doing so much thinking over the last 18, 20 months about past, present, future missteps and corrections and goals. And a few days later, I called Barbara, sent an email, and said that I thought that the Joseph Winterbottom collection might be an appropriate subject because it is one that is timely. We're celebrating the centennial of this collection, but it is a collection that touches on the idea of past, present, and goals for the future, as well as ambitions, and then the joy of being able to correct a misstep. And so on that note, I will, I hope, take over a screen. And if I've done this right, you should be able to see what I'm calling Breaking Rules, Making History, the 100 years of the Joseph Winterbottom collection. The Joseph Winterbottom collection was conceived.
James, so far we're not sharing a screen. Have you done anything?
I thought I've gone to full screen. Do I need to take over at this point, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's see here.
I thought I'd done it.
How about share screen?
I thought I did. There, I did. Ha!
Is it working now?
Absolutely.
We're at 20 months in and I still don't have it down. So like the Winterbottom collection, I continue to aspire for something better. But here we go. It's the Breaking Rules, Making History, 100 Years of the Joseph Winterbottom collection. It's a collection that was conceived not only for the Art Institute, but really for the city of Chicago. And it's unlike anything else we have here at the museum. The collection comprises 35 paintings by European artists, and it covers 125 years. 1862 to 1987, it goes from Gustave Courbet to Gerhard Richter. It also notably includes beloved works of Impressionism, Symbolism, Modernism, Surrealism. And yes, it is one of a number of notable collections here at the Art Institute, but what distinguishes the Winterbottom collection from others here and why it carries so much weight, not only among our curators, but among peer institutions, is its very nature, its dynamism. And that is as important as the works that are included in it. Now, I have a feeling as fans of the Art Institute out there that you are already familiar with some of our renowned collections, including the Clarence Buckingham collection of Japanese woodblock prints, known worldwide for its size and strength. On the left, we have, of course, the Great Wave, which is one of the most beloved images here at the Art Institute. The image on the right is Yoshitsune's horse washing falls at Yoshino in Yamato province. This was recently featured in our summer exhibition of Japanese woodblock prints of fantastical landscapes by Hokusai and Hiroshige. Similarly important, the Helen Birch Bartlett Memorial Collection. It was assembled by artist and Art Institute trustee Clarence I'm sorry, Frederick Clay Bartlett and his wife, Helen Birch Bartlett. The group includes icons of post-impressionism and early modernism. And then if you were lucky enough to see Monet in Chicago in the last year, you may remember this wall right by the opening of the exhibition that hailed the three foundational collections that help distinguish our Monet holdings among the best in the world. One characteristic that these historic collections share is their relatively static nature. By and large, the Ryerson, Palmer, and Coburn collections, just like the Buckingham and Bartlett collections before them, are much the same today as when they entered the museum. True, the Art Institute may deaccession a work from time to time, but it's certainly not the donor's wish nor the museum's practice to accept a print, a painting, or other work of art with the intention to sell it and buy something else. They're called collections for a reason. The Winterbotham collection, however, is different. It has evolved over the past century, and it's done so purposefully in an unceasing quest to really refine this assemblage into a truly exceptional grouping. The unique nature of the collection was established by its founder, Joseph Winterbotham. He was not actually a great art aficionado. Rather, he was a Chicagoan, first and foremost. And through his travels, he recognized that to be a great city, Chicago needed to have a great museum. And that is the basis for this collection. Back in the late 19-teens, the Art Institute was regularly exhibiting important contemporary art. Famously, we hosted the Armory Show in 1913. But back at that time, we had yet to build notable holdings in the area. The Palmer, Ryerson, and Coburn collections were still years away. And so what Joseph Winterbotham did in 1921 was offer a way for the Art Institute to purchase the paintings it wanted and needed if it was going to broaden its holdings. Winterbotham offered both a plan and a gift, a sum of $50,000, which was to be invested with the proceeds used, and I quote, for the purchase of works of art painted by European artists of foreign subjects. And the gift was hailed at the time. It was notable not only for Winterbotham's generosity, but for the special conditions he placed on it. The collection of paintings to be purchased with the funds should eventually number 35, and not more than $2,500 should be expended on any single painting. It was a different era, to say the least. Once the collection of 35 paintings was accumulated, any picture could be replaced by one of better quality, provided the purchase price of the new work was greater than $5,000. Again, different dollar figures back then. By making the last stipulation, Winterbotham made clear his intention was to ensure that, and I quote again, the purchase of paintings as time goes on is towards superior works of art and of greater merit and continuous improvement, unquote. Now, Joseph Winterbotham's gift of $50,000 formed the initial Winterbotham endowment, and he was delighted to see his plan take root, encouraging the museum to build his namesake collection. The second generation of Winterbothams shared their father's philanthropic bent and married it with a genuine love of art that would benefit Chicago as a whole and the Art Institute in particular. Now, in 1916, Rue Winterbotham Carpenter, third from the left, would help found the Arts Club, and 2 years later, she would become the club's president. During her tenure, she organized the first showings in Chicago of drawings by Picasso, sculpture by Rodin and Brancusi, and paintings by Georges Braque, John Marin, and Charles Sheeler. With her older brother, John, of whom I do not have a photo, Rue would augment her father's original $50,000 gift increasing the endowment to $70,000. Joseph Winterbotham Jr., meanwhile, he's on the far right, would play a key role in the years ahead, both through generous gifts of art, as well as advocating periodically for how the collection should be built. Later generations of Winterbothams include Rue Winterbotham Shaw, who, like her aunt and namesake, served as president of the Arts Club. Her son, architect, sculptor, and poet, Patrick Shaw, who would serve as a member of the Art Institute's Architecture and Design Committee, as well as the family liaison to the Winterbotham Committee. And Sophia Shaw, the former president of the Chicago Botanic Garden and past chair of the Arts Club, current trustee of the Art Institute, who currently serves as a liaison to the committee. Over the past century, each of these family members helped to build and refine the Winterbotham collection. Now, on a journey of 1,000 miles, you start with a single step. When you're building a collection of 35 paintings, you start with a single purchase. And this is it. Henri Matisse's Woman Standing at the Window, which was painted in 1919 and acquired by the Art Institute just 2 years later, 1921, as the inaugural year of the collection. Now, this painting and others that followed were selections made by the Art Institute's Board of Trustees and their appointed representatives. The direction on how this was to be done was part of the original Winterbotham gift and deed of gift. The fact that the museum pursued modern artists was really a reflection of what the trustees were most concerned with and what those individuals were pursuing for their own collections. And this was really outside of any specific direction that Joseph Winterbotham had given. Again, he had just said paintings by European artists of foreign subjects. This focus on modern and contemporary was one of the museum's own design. Now, additions to the collection followed at a regular pace. The next two acquisitions came in 1922. Max Clarenbach's Garden and Julius Paul Junghans's Memories of the Tyrol were part of the Carnegie Annual in 1914. That exhibition subsequently traveled to the Art Institute, and those canvases caught the interest and attention of the Art Institute's curators. Here you can see those two canvases called out from the Art Institute's exhibition catalog. Now, the Winterbotham endowment really was a godsend for the museum, as it allowed the Art Institute to purchase works that it might not otherwise be able to consider. At the same time, the museum's trustees were acquiring paintings for their own collections, and wonderfully many of these would also come to the museum. And of course, sometimes the interests of the museum and the contemporary collectors overlapped. Along those lines, on 3 separate occasions, Joseph Winterbotham learned of trustees who were taking trips to Europe, and he provided them with checks to purchase paintings specifically for the Winterbotham collection. And one of those was the Paul Gauguin hibiscus tree, which was purchased in 1923. Some 98 years later, this painting is still part of the Winterbotham collection. Other notable acquisitions of this era included Toulouse-Lautrec's Equestrienne at the Cirque Fernando, purchased in 1925, shortly before Joseph Winterbotham died. Like several of the Winterbotham canvases, Equestrienne came to the museum with a fantastic provenance, which added luster to the collection. In this case, the painting basically went from Toulouse-Lautrec's studio to the newly opened Moulin Rouge in Paris. And it was there for 20 years before going on a tour of North America and being acquired by the Art Institute of Chicago. Other European acquisitions included George Brock's Still Life of 1919. In this case, it was a work purchased by Frederick Clay Bartlett on a 1929 trip to Europe. It was around this time that Bartlett raised an issue that was at once delicate, but somewhat urgent. That $2,500 cap on purchases was becoming a problem. Of course, budget constraints, as any collector knows, are always a concern. And I love this cartoon. You rarely see this kind of joy for under 10,000. Writing to the museum's director, Bartlett lamented, "I think we must try very hard to change the terms of the gift. Otherwise, as things are going, we could never get together a collection worthy of Mr. Winterbotham's aim." Despite Bartlett's suggestion, the museum did not bring forward this concern to the family, and acquisitions proceeded as originally outlined. Fortuitously, Joseph Winterbotham's son, Joseph Winterbotham Jr., would step forward. Here you see him with Salvador Dali's Shade of Night Descending. In 1935, Joseph Winterbotham Jr. suggested that the composition of the Winterbotham Committee be changed to include the active participation of a Winterbotham family member, along with a trustee from the board, as well as the museum's director. And this governing structure that was proposed in 1935 is still what governs the collection today. Fortunately, Joseph Winterbotham Jr. was an ideal addition to the committee. He had a genuine interest in art and had assembled his own noteworthy collection of Asian and European work. Indeed, he would leave significant pieces to the Art Institute at his death, and several paintings would enter the Winterbotham collection. Now, at the time that the committee was revised, the younger Winterbotham also sought to formalize the de facto collecting practice that had put an emphasis on contemporary art. The new edict read in part, "No work is to be purchased by the Winterbotham collection executed by an artist who is dead over 10 years. Only foreign, contemporary, living artists' work to be purchased." Now, trips to Europe in the 30s were far less frequent, of course, during the Depression. And so attention turned to galleries in New York that were presenting European artists. Another change in the 30s came with the gift of a work of art from a Winterbotham family to the namesake collection. Up on the screen, I have not only Joseph Winterbotham, but that Dali I mentioned earlier. This came from Winterbotham's personal collection and joined the Winterbotham collection. Interestingly, it would also be the first work from the Winterbotham collection to leave the museum. Well, the 1921 deed of gift allowed for removing paintings once the collection numbered 35. An exception was made in this case. In 1943, the museum traded up, exchanging Shades of Night Descending, along with $1,400 for Inventions of the Monsters, which remains in the collection and is on view in the modern wing. Here at work was one of the governing principles of the collection, continuous improvement. The 1940s saw other changes in the collection. In the wake of several important exhibitions of the great Mexican muralists, the Winterbotham Committee decided to go beyond Europe and added works by Jose Clemente Orozco, Rufino Tamayo, and Diego Rivera. The Rivera, wonderfully, was a gift from Joseph Winterbotham Jr. And then finally, in 1946, some 26 years after the collection's founding, Yves Tanguy's The Rapidity of Sleep became the 35th painting in the Winterbotham collection. Now, having the full complement of paintings was cause for celebration. It was also cause for a 1947 exhibition that brought all the paintings together. Here we have multiple generations of the Winterbotham family at that exhibition. Significantly, the acquisition of that 35th painting also ushered in a new era for the collection. The museum could now remove paintings from the collection and replace them with superior works, of course, provided any new purchase was valued at $5,000 or more. Again, not an issue today. The idea of actively managing this group of 35 paintings with the expectation, indeed the anticipation, that a canvas's permanent place in the collection was not assured was radical then as it is today. And as I said before, we continue to deaccession paintings, as do peer institutions, but doing so is a very deliberate process, and it is slow. The idea is that great museums acquire paintings for future generations, and as such, we're not prone to taking risks. But what the Winterbotham collection does, what its founding documents make clear, is that the Winterbotham collection supports risk-taking. So mindful of this key moment in the Winterbotham collection's history, it's worth looking at what the Winterbothams are looking at in this photo. They're focused on Marc Chagall's The Praying Jew, which is an Art Institute icon. It came in 1937. It is always on the walls unless it is loaned to another exhibition. And as we look at what they are enjoying, it is also worth noticing what they are not giving note to. Just to the left of The Praying Jew is André Derain's Stag Hunt. The painting was acquired in 1938, the same year it was acquired, the same year that it was created, and it would be sold in 1957 with the proceeds to be reinvested in new acquisitions for the collection. Similarly, Summer Garden hangs on the wall behind the Winterbothams. It too would fail to hold its own over time, and the Art Institute would sell the painting in 1992. These changes reflect that guiding principle, constant improvement, which governs the collection. The strategic edits to the collection were further shaped by a return to its roots. The 1935 amendment insisting on contemporary acquisitions was eliminated and focus restored to European artists. Which begs the question, what of the great Mexican muralists? Well, the Orozco was replaced in 1964 by Baltas's Solitaire. Rufino Tamayo's Woman with a Bird Cage would be replaced by a Monet in 1973. Today, the Orozco and Tamayo are part of our Arts of the Americas collection. Pre-pandemic, you would have seen these paintings hanging together in the Rice Building. Today, the Orozco is still up in the Rice Galleries. It's flanked on the left by an Archibald Motley self-portrait, and rather muddy in this image, you can blame my iPhone for it, is a Charles White. And again, this slide proves the trope. Slides don't do the work justice. You've got to see them in person. Meanwhile, the Tamayo is currently on view in our Amerindian galleries. It's center here. It is featured with Hopi ceramics, Navajo metalwork, and in the distance, some pre-Columbian treasures. It is also flanked by other modern Mexicans, including a new Rivera that came to the museum through another donor. That Mother Mexico painting is no longer in the collection. But of course, what of the art itself? What about the paintings that today comprise the collection? And it's really important to look in the galleries because while the concept of the Winterbotham collection is radical, what really matters most to our members and visitors is what they get to see on the walls. And here we have the realization of Joseph Winterbotham's plans. Simply put, the paintings bring the galleries to life. And we have clockwise on the top, the rightmost painting is the beach and Falaise d'Amont at Etretat. In the center of the upper right image is Hodler's Truth. And then that hibiscus tree, which entered the collection 98 years ago, hangs with other Gauguins in the upper half of our Gonzalez building. Besides delighting, the works are designed to engage, and our famous curator of modern art back at mid-century, Catherine Koo, really put that idea front and center, encouraging a very close and thoughtful look at Madame Pompadour from the collection. And that still plays out today. Here is our Comer curator of international modern art, Caitlin Haskell. Immediately to her left is Head of a Woman, which was once owned by Gertrude Stein and is now part of the Winterbotham collection. And it is juxtaposed with Picasso's Old Guitarist from the Helen Birch Bartlett Memorial Collection. Now, in that same gallery, you also have very nearby, created that same spring, a bronze by Picasso, Head of Fernand. There's nowhere else in the world that you can see Picasso working at this level in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions as he explores Cubism. And again, that is one of the great things that the Winterbotham collection brings to life. Now, of course, we want people to contemplate, we want people to think, but they're also to have fun. And so on that note, I am happy to give you Kirk Douglas and his brush with the Winterbotham collection. This is just after he had his Academy Award nominated performance as Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life. And he's coming head to head with the man he played. And no one had as much fun in the galleries as Ferris Bueller and his pals. And of course, the Winterbotham collection is getting in on the act. That is a Gauguin portrait of a woman with still life on the left, and then the Equestrienne, which we've seen earlier. The Winterbotham collection also plays a key role in special exhibitions here at the Art Institute. We are very happy to take advantage of the treasures that we hold. Delaunay's Champ de Mars, the Red Tower, was the opening salvo in the exhibition Shatter, Rupture, Break in 2015. And in the series Go from 2017, Fernand Léger's Railway Crossing had its own wall. And then, of course, we also have these great Winterbotham paintings put to very good use in our major exhibitions that take place in Regenstein Hall. Not only are these paintings part of the exhibitions, they play key roles. And that's Time Transfixed, the ultimate canvas in the 2014 exhibition, Magritte, Mystery of the Ordinary. That painting joined the Winterbotham collection in 1970. And then from Gauguin, Artist as Alchemist, we have Woman in Front of a Still Life by Cézanne. I mean, again, it's not just that these are great paintings, they come to us with great stories. The Gauguin painting is a Gauguin, but it's in the style of Cézanne. And in fact, behind the woman is a painting by Cézanne. If you look on the right-hand side of the canvas, just above the woman's chair, you can see a white vertical strip. That's part of the frame of the Cézanne painting. And you can also see at the woman's left hand cuff of her top an extension of that frame. And the frame has been signed by Paul Gauguin. It says P. Go. And it is P. Go 90. It's the way he's making a stamp on this still life by Cézanne, which he owned. And he famously wrote that he loved that painting and he would hold on to it until he had to sell it for food to eat. And of course, that day did eventually come. He sells the Cézanne. Today, that still life hangs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but we have Gauguin's version of it right here in the Winterbotham collection. Fast forward to today, and we are still putting the Winterbotham collection to use. That's the 1973 edition that was part of Monet in Chicago this past year. And then for the Jewel Box exhibition, Toulouse-Lautrec and Celebrity Culture of Paris, we have the Equestrienne making its appearance. And then when Winterbotham paintings aren't on the walls here in Chicago, they are inevitably on someone else's. Be that in Indianapolis, that's where this neo-impressionist portraiture exhibition took place, or across the Atlantic. And Madame Pompadour made a star turn at the Tate's Modigliani exhibition in 2018. Chaim Soutin's Dead Fowl traveled to New York for the Jewish Museum's exhibition, Chaim Soutin Flesh. And there it is. Notably, the Wall Street Journal calls out our carcass for special attention there, with all of its wonderful blood and silvery scales of the dead fowl. And then when the Asian Art Museum did its big exhibition on the Rama epic, it was a promotional video for the exhibition that would tout, of all things, the Art Institute's Sita by Rodin. It was hailed as one of the 5 works that people had to see when they came to see it. And of course, it was the only non-Asian work depicting the Rama epic that was so cited. And sometimes the Winterbottom collection is part of an exhibition even when it's not in the galleries. And that was the case for Tarsila do Amaral, Inventing Modern Art in Brazil. The Art Institute does not actually own any paintings by Tarsila. We were still able to undertake this exhibition because of the talents of our curators, the skill of our conservation department, and our leadership in the field. Here we have a view of the entry to that exhibition from Griffin Court in the modern wing. Inside, on staggered walls, we have 3 works, 3 of Tarsila's most important works. And one of them, A Negra, came from a museum in Sao Paulo. They were ready to loan for this very important exhibition, but of course they were also ready to receive. This was, I hate to call it a quid pro quo, but a quid pro quo. Something had to go down to Brazil in its place. And what the Brazilians wanted was Delaney's Champ de Mars, the Red Tower. And why did they want it? Because this painting had once been owned by the great Brazilian artist Tarsila. And it was a coming home of sorts for the painting. And they were very happy to integrate it into presentations down in Sao Paulo. And now I'm bringing us again forward, because although it was a century ago that the Winterbottom collection was founded, it continues to have ripples on all that the Art Institute does today, or much of what the Art Institute does today. And it's not a day where I will cover every single one of those ripples, but I want to highlight 2 big ones. Perhaps the most significant involves Chicago collectors Stefan Edlis and Gail Neeson. Stefan Edlis talked openly and very enthusiastically about how the parameters of the Winterbottom collection, the idea of a set number of works and a commitment to pursuing superior pieces, shaped his own collecting. The result was one of the most important private collections of contemporary art in the world. And when Stefan Edlis and Gail Neeson made a gift of more than 40 of their pieces to the Art Institute, it dramatically elevated the quality of what we have in the galleries. There was notably and controversially a hubbub around the gift agreement for this generous donation. The idea that the Art Institute must keep this suite of paintings on view together for 25 years, and they must continue or remain on view for 50 years, though they could be integrated for that second 25 within the rest of our holdings. And there was an outcry from some that this was a donor dictating terms to the museum, and this is not how great institutions should work. And in some years that might ring as a true statement, but for the Art Institute and for those familiar with our collection, there's the knowledge that these 40-some works are of such high caliber that with or without that gift agreement, they were not going to come down. These were easily brought in and bumping works that had previously been on the walls. it was a case that the Art Institute is forever better by bringing works like this in. And again, it was the Winterbottom collection that had served as a guiding principle in building the Edlis-Neeson collection. As Stefan Edlis told the Tribune at the time, if one came in, one had to go out. Sophia Shaw, who's the latest of the Winterbothams, and her husband Art Collins are similarly building on the legacy of the Winterbotham collection. 3 years ago, the couple established an endowment to support contemporary art. Recognizing what her great-great-grandfather's gift did for the Art Institute, Sophia is keenly aware of how important such an exhibition or such an endowment can be, both now and going forward. And meanwhile, what is going on with the Winterbotham collection today? Well, for a number of years in the early 2000s, the Winterbotham collection was holding at 34. Money was building up from the endowment as well as previous sales. And in 2016, the Art Institute purchased Jean Fautrier's All Alone. The painting is an example of art informel, which roughly speaking is a French counterpart to abstract expressionism. And today it hangs in the modern wing with European and Middle Eastern artists who were experimenting with abstraction at the time. And with All Alone, the Winterbotham collection again stood at 35, but that was not going to be for long. Lucian Freud's Sunny Morning, Eight Legs entered the Winterbotham collection in 1997, the same year it was painted. Last year, the Art Institute made the decision to part with the canvas. Having deaccessioned the Freud, the museum now had funds, and I should say significant funds, and an opening to acquire a new Winterbotham painting. That painting would be William Holman Hunt's The Shadow of Death. And here you see the painting in our conservation lab. On the left-hand side of the screen, you have Gloria Groom. On the other side of the painting, you have curator Emerson Bowyer, and you also have Sophia Shaw from the Winterbotham Committee. The painting arrived in the spring. The Winterbotham Committee approved its acquisition in April, and it went before the Board of Trustees in June, at which time approval was unanimous. William Holman Hunt was one of the original 3 members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. These British painters, poets, and art critics sought a return to the rich details and complex colors of the Renaissance before Raphael and the Mannerists. This is what they were looking to go back to. The Shadow of Death is a striking example of Holman Hunt's work. And with its purchase, the Art Institute is now home to the most important Pre-Raphaelite painting in North America. So it was a coup for the Art Institute. If you are not a fan of the Pre-Raphaelites, perhaps that will not resonate so much with you. But if it is as important as I say it is, how on earth did it get here during the pandemic? Well, we are not ones at the Art Institute to reveal who is selling paintings, particularly when a sale has yet to conclude. But as this acquisition was formalized by the Board of Trustees in June, I can tell you that the work came from Andrew Lloyd Webber. He is famously one of the great collectors of Pre-Raphaelite paintings in the world. He, of course, during the pandemic was very focused on support for British theater and providing funding for them. It turns out that one of the art dealers that Emerson Bowyer reached out to when the Lucian Freud money arrived at the Art Institute had offices just below an art dealer who works very closely with Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber. And of course, being who he is, he was able to facilitate the export of the painting. And what of the painting itself? I really hope you will get to see it in person. That's what you need to do. But in the meantime, happy to give you a preview. What we have here is a painting of the Jesus of history as opposed to the Christ of faith. Here we have him depicted as a carpenter. He is stretching out following a day's labor. The rays of the sun are casting a shadow on the block wall behind him. And it's in that shadow that we see his fate prefigured. The arched window behind his head becomes a halo, just as the star-shaped window, and I hope you can see that, is the Star of Bethlehem, or at least so evokes it. The shadow on the wall, of course, anticipates the crucifixion, with Jesus's arms stretched wide across the toolbar on the wall, which becomes the crossbeam of the cross. Now, of course, Mary is a good Jewish mother. So what has she been doing? She has been tending to the gift of the Magi all these 30-some years. But she has looked up and seen with horror what lies ahead. We see other elements too. There's a plumb bob hanging from that toolbar. That becomes the Sacred Heart of Christ. The shadow just to the left of Jesus is the shadow of his saw. And the shadow is meant to represent the sword or spear that will pierce Christ's side when he is on the cross. The shadow of death joins Beata Beatrix by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, one of the other three founding members of the Brotherhood, and again, really elevates our holdings in this area, putting us at the forefront. And someday, Gloria Groom hopes that the painting will be joined by this wonderful print that we acquired about 20 years ago, the print specifically based on the painting. And that's one of the great things about this painting. It was actually designed to serve as the model for the print. So it's done on a beautiful mahogany board and is in exceptional conditions. As Gloria Groom contemplates what that future exhibition may entail, we hope that we will have some textiles included, because for authenticity's sake, William Holman Hunt went to the Holy Land and he acquired textiles that he then used for his models. Those textiles today are owned by the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and we are, fingers crossed, going to have a loan. Whether you go to see the William Holman Hunt or one of the other paintings, my big thing is look. There is so much to see here, and keep your eyes out, because change is always afoot with the Winterbotham collection, and who knows what we will see on the walls in years to come. And I thank you for being such attentive listeners, and am happy to throw it open for questions if you have any. But it is such a great collection, and the story behind it and its founding continues to resonate.
Jay, I always learn something astonishing from you, and just how a collection formed and was thought through and is vital into the future, so that it's flexible and that the family is still involved. I mean, it's major, major material.
When I have the pleasure of walking through the galleries, it's one of the things I think about, because we do have works like the Potter Palmer collection that Bertha Palmer shaped, and her imprint is felt. But there's a story behind how she built that collection and what she did with the paintings. And you have the same thing with Marilyn Alsdorf's collection. And you have a provenance of these works before they arrive at the museum, but then they have their own stories once they're in the galleries. So I fear I've talked everyone's ears off, but again, happy to.
Not in the least. They're just trying to form questions that are appropriate to the magnificent presentation you just made. It's mind-boggling.
I do have a question.
Sure.
When you're talking about management of the fund, and you exit a work, you mentioned it was something that it didn't hold its own.
Yes.
It was one of the criterion. I'm wondering, I'm curious, how do you determine that? How does one take a passive and piece of passive art and attribute an active characteristic like holding its own? What do you look for? How do you define that?
Well, I will share my own thoughts and then throw it out to a curator. Madhu has a better read than I. But I hear from our curators in modern and contemporary art, as well as from collectors, when we're dealing with contemporary works, oftentimes you don't know what you have for 50 years. Sometimes you have a work that is just brilliant and you know right away. I think of our Andy Warhol Mao that was greeted with great derision and complaint when we acquired it. But our curators knew that that was an exceptional piece. And when the Art Institute had its big Warhol show 2 years ago, when the Wall Street Journal did a show of its presentation in New York, that was one of the canvases they zeroed in on. And the curator from the Whitney said, of all the Maos, the Art Institute has the best. Sometimes you know that right off the bat. With the Winterbottom collection, what is great is that you can take a risk, you can think maybe you have something, but then maybe it turns out you don't. And I think of the Lucian Freud that we just sold. That was painted in 1997, and we acquired it that very same year. And I think in the ideas, the minds of our curators, not to speak for them, but the Art Institute ought to have a great Lucian Freud. At this point, we have no Lucian Freud. We sold our one big painting. But after, 25 years, the consensus among our curators was that that was not a great Lucian Freud. It was an okay Lucian Freud. And be it from a collector or scrambling and pooling money 15 years from now, by damn, we were going to get a great Lucian Freud that deserved to be at the Art Institute. And so this one went on the block and we brought something else in its place. But one of the great things about this, not everything has in time proved its worth. Madhu, do you have anything to add? Did I speak out of turn?
No, I think what you said was very, very pertinent, because I think sometimes we have the artist represented in the collection, but not necessarily a work that we want by that artist or something that we can display within our galleries that helps tell a story in some way about that artist. And I think at various points we have just said whatever, just let's keep it. But I know that I've worked, for example, on a deaccession with contemporary of a painting that, in fact, is sad that Betty is not here, because Betty, in fact, helped us get a gift from a professor at the University of Chicago of a Hussein. And for the longest time, that was the only Hussein that we had. But yet it wasn't a Hussein of the quality that we could ever put out in the gallery. So what was the point in having the painting just to be able to say that we had a Hussein, when it sometimes what happens is it prevents us from actually then actively going out and seeking something that we really need for the collection. So we decided to deaccession it, and with the money we bought another South Asian artist, because that was the condition, but something that we knew that we were going to show in the galleries, and so we bought a Rashid Arayan, so a modern work also equivalent, but an artist that we knew we could show in the galleries. So we do make these considerations, and sometimes the over a period of time, our attitudes about a particular artist or a particular work changes. And I think that we don't always have the facility to be able to deaccession a work, but it's a question of whether the conditions of a particular gift allows that or not, when we can do it. So it really depends from case to case.
I love what you said about what can you do with a work that perhaps doesn't belong in a gallery anymore. And I'm reminded of a story that James Rondeau, our current director, told about the opening of the Modern Wing, or the months leading up to it. So from January to the end of April 2009, we had 4 or 5 curators who were in the Modern Wing almost every day, moving first maquettes and then original works of art around to figure out what they wanted. And James Rondeau was very eager in one gallery to have a second opinion from Douglas Druick, who was in charge of European painting and sculpture at the time. And they were on cell phones, and with the size of the Modern Wing, Douglas came down to look at the gallery James was working on. And by that time, James Rondeau had stepped away. And so Douglas assessed the gallery on his own, and it featured works from the New York School, Abstract Expressionism, and the half generation afterward. And James stepped into the gallery, back into the gallery, after Douglas had been there on his own for a few minutes. And Douglas turned to him and said, if the purpose of this exhibition or installation is to show that our Rauschenberg isn't very good, you've succeeded. And the installation was changed, the Rauschenberg stayed, but was given less prominence. And eventually we acquired a Rauschenberg we are really proud of. And now we have several. And that one that Douglas looked at and saw was an Art Institute quality, was no longer world-class, is no longer on view. I don't know if we've deaccessioned it, but unless we are desperate, I don't think it's going to be back on the walls. But I loved the idea, if your purpose was to show that we don't have a very good Rauschenberg, you succeeded.
Let me ask you another question. So have you ever sold a painting out of that collection that 30 or 40 years later you said, not a good idea that we let that go? Because as a collector, not of paintings, but of other types of objects, and having worked with dealers and experts, is to try to tell me how to objectify the issue of quality. Because there is a whole bunch of subjectivity here, and saying, okay, you pointed that to that piece is a 10 and that one is a 6. Why? And you get a lot, and again, I'm in a scientific field and not everything can be reduced to numbers, but I get a lot of very squishy answers to this. Now, I know in my own collecting, through years of seeing a lot of objects, I have my own taste as to what I think is good, but I hardly would put that forward as in a standard that everybody else would accept. Yeah. So anyway, number one, will you confess to such a thing? And has it ever happened? Because it may have happened, but we may not confess to it. And then the other issue is, of course, the subjective nature of saying, oh, that Rauschenberg, and all the experts are saying, but a lot of people, as we know, in certain, shall we say, scandals recently coming out of New York when it comes to forged paintings, and I'm not going to go into that issue. However, the forgeries worked because there were a lot of so-called experts who said that these were genuine. And again, the issue there is a lot of when it came down to the science proved that they were wrong, number one, and two, the forger confessed, and that was actually bottom line. But the subjectivity aspect of this has always bothered me, especially as someone who has relied in some measure upon dealers to telling me what pieces are good and what are not. And now I'm going to shut up and let you talk.
So in the case of the Winterbotham collection, I don't think that there is anything that we have let go that we deeply, deeply regret. And when I was working on this presentation, that very first painting that we acquired, the Matisse woman standing at a window, it was rather telling that through all of my research and spending a lot of time on the web, that somewhat miscolored image that I was able to track down was something from, I think, called postersgalore.net or something. And it was a reproduction of a reproduction. And there's not much out there on that painting because it is not one of Matisse's great works. We had purchased it fresh from its creation. It was only 2 years old. We have better Matisses, and that necessarily went by the wayside. And one of the ones that I showed when the Winterbottom family in the slide was looking at The Praying Jew by Chagall, and the painting next to it was by André Derain. He was big in the 19 teens and 20s, not just with the Art Institute, but with a lot of our trustees. And we had more than a dozen canvases by Derain at one point. And as opposed to Matisse and Rousseau and some of the other artists of that era, neither art historians nor the market place a premium on him anymore. And we have whittled down our collection. We haven't gotten rid of all of the Derains, but the ones that were repetitive or derivative, that didn't add anything to the stories we can tell, have departed. That's the Winterbottom collection. I can tell you there are other things that maybe that we haven't regretted deeply losing, but I know I received a call from a trustee a few years ago who donated work over the years, and he was reflecting on what he'd given and what he thought had held up over time and what had not. And he recalled being in conversation with a curator and an art dealer from New York back in the 1970s. He donated a work, and the dealer and the curator were both certain that the museum could trade up if we sold the one work and then bought a new one. And the new work, I don't want to say it was a loser, but we ended up selling it about 30 years later for less than we paid for it. And we probably should have held on to the Max Ernst that had come in the first place. But that's not one that dramatically impacts a visitor's experience in the museum. Those were lesser, but it happens.
I have a question. You had a really lovely personal introduction, and I've been sitting here trying to guess what your job is. Okay, like, what's his job? What's the name of his job? What, you have such an overview. I'm glad you have that job. What's your job? What is your position? It's like with this incredible insight into a lot of these long-term strategic. Are you a spy? Are you have a secret? Do other people know? Are you like the invisible person on a camera?
I wish it were that glamorous. I have a new title this year. We're rethinking our positions at the Art Institute.
Oh, no.
And so I'm now executive director of philanthropy. I used to be executive director of planned giving and special gifts. But basically, what I like to think I do is I focus on stewardship and some of the families who are closest to the Art Institute, who through either their gifts of art or philanthropic support have had a profound impact on the collection. And these are individuals who are not only doing great things for us now, but also have done wonderful things for us perhaps in the past. And I hate to say that anyone's greatest days of giving are over, but I want to make sure that if a family has given us a Picasso or a beautiful Degas, and Grandma died, or Aunt Phyllis, who gave us the painting, died, that I was in touch with that family even after the gift came in, and that the museum is aware that that painting could very well be on someone else's wall. And we want to keep that family in mind, that they are still part of our group, our family here at the Art Institute. I think of sometimes, and this is usually curators who are no longer with us, who think that once a work of art comes, it's the Art Institute's work or it's that curator's work of art. And I like to think of the history of that work of art, that maybe it once belonged to Gertrude Stein, and then it came in because of a donor here. And I want to remember and acknowledge the who helped bring it in and continue to tell stories about why we're grateful.
Well,
So,
you're so
James-
good at it. You're so good at it. I mean, you really are got such a gracious approach to all of it, even the knowledge of art. They're lucky to have you. What a great job. Amazing. I learned so much today. I feel like this is the kind of stuff about philanthropy people want to know. You know, this is what Barbara and I, we very first met. It's one of the first things we talked about was like, man, patrons are like good for everything except being patrons. You know what I mean? It's like, we'll do everything except listen to them, you know? And it was almost how we started when we met. And like, what happened to when patrons were really involved? And so it's really a delight. I just learned so much from you. I wish the way you talk about philanthropy was more prevalent and popular and understood. I mean, I learned a lot today.
well,
James is unique. He is a weaver of the web, and he weaves the textiles of what is good and fine and valuable about the donors. I mean, just because an institution gets its paws on an important piece, that, you know, it should not be, what have you done for me recently? I'm not going to talk to you unless you get. And James is gifted at that weaving. And yes, there are stories, and those stories are what are so important and positive about the institution.
And he's very good at, passing on the stories beyond, the generation, say, of the donors. Because I think we all learn so much from when James talks about any of these subjects. For example, I think when what was it, James, when the museum turned 125?
125.
Yeah, he did this amazing talk for the public. Again, weaving together the story of the 125 in ways that makes it relevant to today. I mean, just like the Winterbottom story. And I think it's so important for an institution to know, even for us curators, to know about these people who went before us and how they thought about the works of art, because we might be familiar with the works of art, but we may not be familiar with the people. And I think every generation needs to know about some of these families, because that's how then we can weave the narrative also to the new people who are coming to us and help them understand that this is this great institution, not because of just one or two people. It's a whole, generations of people and their families. And I think sometimes I find that people get fixated on individuals. But actually the institution is bigger than all of us. And I think that remembering these people in this kind of present way is one of the ways to kind of understand that the institution will be here long after all of us are gone.
I can't agree with you more, Maju. It goes back to the art, and that links us.
James, I'm curious, when I listened to what the top prices were supposed to be.
Yes.
And, these were collectors who believed deeply in what they were supporting. Are you finding that many of the collectors today, it's not for the love of art or the piece? Trading up means a few extra millions, that it's a commodity rather. I'm just very confused by the whole, not confused, appalled would be a better word.
Well, I think it varies from collector to collector as well as the field. I know James Rondeau shared the story of a trustee who was very focused for years on contemporary art, who had purchased one work, I want to say 10 or 12 years ago, and had increased so dramatically in value that the trustee began to question the whole premise of contemporary art and what he was getting when he bought. And he started to focus on another curatorial department where the prices are somewhat more stable, and he feels there's more of a correlation between dollar and artwork rather than just all speculation. But again, it's what the market is willing to bear, and tastes change. We talked about that, what Jack brought up about what does hold its own. And El Greco was huge, and then for 400 years, El Greco was out of style. And because of that, we have one of the greatest El Grecos ever in our galleries, because he had been out of style.
Allan.
What's really wonderful about listening to you describe the collection is that it's a real understanding that collections are living things. And too often, I think we just look at the individual works, which makes it very easy to see them as objects. But by looking at the collection, and especially with this particular collection, the passion is what gets across. The passion of the collector. You know, why did they pick this? What does it mean? And I think that the whole concept of writing it into the gift is, no, this is to be alive. You know, and we trust you. You know, I think that's the biggest thing, is that the donors, instead of having their ego so tied up in the works, they believe in the institution to say, you will choose what is best for all of us. And, you know, goodbye and good luck. So.
And I love that it was started by a business leader who didn't feel he knew art, but he knew that art was important to being a great city. And what a great gift to all of us that it continues to live on.
I mean, for those of us who do collect, as as Michael and Jack were saying before, is that, you do keep upgrading. And I look at stuff now that I bought 20, 30 years ago, and I said, what was I thinking? Why did I overmat that? That makes no sense at all. And, but most of us are not in a position to then so more readily keep upgrading and upgrading. But I think we all try to do the best that we can in order to make the collections meaningful to us as individuals and as families. And then again, I think, many of us feel eventually it'll go somewhere, so that it continues to provide that kind of joy to other people that it provides to us. So this is great. I had no idea about that collection, the fact that so many of those pieces were by this, one group. Absolutely astonishing. I mean, each one you were checking over, say, oh, I know that, I know that, I know. You're kidding. This is owned by one person, by one family.
So, unless you're looking at all those labels, you don't think of it as a collection. But when you see them pooled together, the idea that there was this overarching principle guiding the formation is inspiring and intriguing.
I love that the great granddaughter is still exquisitely involved.
Yeah,
it's absolutely terrific that she is. And the other idea, this goes back to what Allan was saying about trust, that yes, they want to be consulted when a new work is acquired, but the knowledge that curators need freedom and they are supporting that creativity and ambition is terrific.
And the passion gets conveyed, and that's what's so great.
Cool. Wonderful. James, thank you, thank you, thank you from all of your fans here.
Well,
and I can't wait for the next time.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking with you all today.
James, thank you again for taking the time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.